When 35-year-old Hannah Carter was found brutally attacked in her own home, her friends and family were left devastated and desperate for answers. Outgoing, loyal, and deeply loved, Hannah was the last person anyone expected to fall victim to such a violent end. But when she missed a key client presentation on September 14th, a day she had meticulously prepared for, coworkers knew something was wrong. As police began retracing her final hours, a familiar face surfaced, someone who claimed to care for her, but was hiding more than anyone expected. This full episode unpacks the chilling truth behind a betrayal that hit too close to home and the emotional fallout for everyone left behind. Subscribe for more gripping true crime episodes that reveal how sometimes the real danger isn't a stranger at all, it's someone you thought you knew. Hannah Carter's world had always looked carefully composed from the outside, an elegant mix of career success, close-knit friendships, and a sense of control over every detail of her life that others often admired, even envied. She was the one who planned birthdays months in advance, who sent handwritten notes after business dinners, who checked in on people she hadn't heard from in a while just to say she was thinking of them. Her days were full, but never rushed. Her smile was always warm, but never forced. And so, as detectives began pulling apart the threads of her final 48 hours, they weren't just looking at a victim, they were trying to reconstruct the life of someone who had seemed to so many like she had nothing to fear. The last confirmed sighting of Hannah was the night before her scheduled presentation. She had dinner with a close friend at a small Italian restaurant downtown, casual catch-up, according to staff who remembered them laughing over shared appetizers and wine. The friend, identified as Claire Dawson, had known Hannah for over 8 years. They had worked together at a marketing agency years ago and had stayed close ever since. Claire was the kind of friend who posted throwback selfies on birthdays and always had a key to Hannah's place. She was, by all accounts, part of Hannah's inner circle, trustant, familiar. Claire told investigators that Hannah had seemed normal that night, excited for the presentation, a little nervous about some recent office politics, but nothing unusual. She said they parted ways around 9:30 p.m., each heading to their cars in the parking lot. Claire said she texted Hannah, "Let me know how it goes tomorrow before bed." There were no replies, but something about her story didn't sit right. The detectives noted that when asked what Hannah had worn that night, Claire hesitated. She got it wrong, not just the color of the dress, but the type entirely. And the waitstaff at the restaurant had a different memory altogether. They remembered Hannah dining alone. At first, that detail was brushed off as a mistake. Memory plays tricks, especially after a shock like losing a close friend. But as they combed through Hannah's building security footage, something else stood out. Claire's car had been parked in the visitor lot late that night, hours after the supposed dinner ended. She hadn't told detectives that she came by. There was no mention of a follow-up visit. There's no explanation for why she was there at 1:47 a.m. or why she stayed for nearly 45 minutes. That gap became the focus. They checked phone records next. Text messages between Claire and Hannah were frequent, sometimes daily. But beginning 3 days before Hannah's death, the tone shifted, subtle but distinct. Claire was asking more questions than usual, checking in more often, bringing up conflicts that hadn't existed. And then, the night before the presentation, she sent a message that read, "I still, Dan, understand how you think that's fair." There was no context, no follow-up, just that one line. The next message was the one she told police she sent. "Let me know how it goes tomorrow," which now felt like a cover. Investigators brought Claire back in for another interview, this time with more pointed questions. She denied being at the condo, denied any tension, denied everything. But when confronted with the surveillance footage, her story shifted. She said she had stopped by unannounced, concerned after noticing that Hannah seemed off at dinner. She said she knocked, but no one answered. Claimed she sat in her car for a while before leaving. But there was no record of her calling or texting Hannah during that time. No attempt to reach her by phone, no voicemail, nothing. And then came the discovery that changed everything. The condo had been sealed off, meticulously examined, every drawer opened, every surface dusted, and every piece of digital equipment bagged and logged. Hannah's personal laptop, sleek and silver. had been sitting open on her dining room table when officers arrived, the screen dark, but still powered on, as if someone had been using it moments before things turned violent. At first glance, it seemed like any other working professional's laptop email threads, calendar appointments, spreadsheets, and presentation slides. But as the digital forensics team dove deeper, a folder caught their attention. It wasn't labeled anything obvious or dramatic, just a string of initials and numbers, HC_notes_P17, hidden within the document's archive. Invisible to casual browsing, its last modified date matched the night Hannah was attacked. Inside were nearly 3 years' worth of journal entries, typed, saved, and quietly stored, never shared with anyone. They weren't dramatic or emotionally unhinged. They were structured, reflective, even clinical at times. But as investigators read, entry by entry, a picture of a slow-burning, emotional entanglement began to emerge, one that had gone unnoticed by everyone, including Hannah herself. At first, the entries spoke of joy nights, out with friends, work achievements, memories of family. But then more frequently, they began to reference tension. Not with coworkers or partners, but with Claire. Subtle comments at first, Claire showing up unannounced more often. Claire asking probing questions about her dating life. Claire being overly sensitive to changes in plans. One entry, dated nearly a year before Hannah's death. Read, I think Claire's upset that I didn't invite her to the retreat, but it was a work thing. I'm not sure why she makes me feel like I've done something wrong every time I set a boundary. Over time, the tone shifted further. Hannah wrote about feeling emotionally drained after spending time with Claire, about guilt that didn't seem to belong to her, about the strange sense that Claire was tracking her decisions and reacting to them like they were personal betrayals. And then came a chilling passage, dated 2 months before her death. She cried when I told her I needed space. Not because she was sad, but because she was angry I asked for something she couldn't control. I felt unsafe for the first time. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, like I was being cornered. That sentence, not physically, not yet, became the pivot point in the case. Because whether Hannah realized it or not, she had documented the escalation. She had seen the signs of possessiveness disguised as friendship, of manipulation dressed in the language of loyalty. But like so many people, she had doubted her own instincts. She had hoped things would settle, that space and time would fix what felt broken, but space had only made things worse. In the final entry, written the night before her death, Hannah described an argument. She didn't name Claire, but the details were familiar, an uninvited visit. A confrontation about drifting apart, an accusation that she had changed and was forgetting who really mattered. Hannah had written, I'm starting to see it clearly. She doesn't love me like a friend. She needs me like an obsession. And I think I've let it go too far. That line, more than anything, reframed the investigation. Detectives pored over Hannah's digital journal entries late into the night. And as each new file opened, the words she had carefully hidden painted a picture that none of them could ignore. What at first seemed like a friendship beginning to fray, now appeared more like an emotional entanglement that had been silently suffocating her for years, unnoticed by those around her. And now it was just about what Hannah had written. It was about what those entries revealed about Claire Dawson's state of mind. About a level of attachment that crossed well past any boundary of healthy friendship and into something darker, more possessive, more calculated. The investigation turned back toward the physical evidence. Forensic technicians went over the condo with renewed focus, armed with the context provided by Hannah's words. The crime scene had been messy, but oddly specific. Nothing was stolen, no forced entry, there were no defensive wounds on Hannah's hands, which suggested she had either trusted the person who attacked her or had been caught off guard in a way that left no time to react. That aligned perfectly with the theory now forming around Claire, someone close enough to walk through the front door without suspicion, close enough to be in the room while Hannah let her guard down. Fingerprints were already being processed, but now detectives requested a more focused analysis. Comparing latent prints found on a glass in the kitchen sink, 2 known samples from Claire. A match came back within hours. That in itself wasn't enough to prove guilt. Claire had been to the condo dozens of times, but the timing mattered. The sink had been recently scrubbed, and that glass was the only item inside. It hadn't been there for days. It was likely placed there the night of the incident. That, combined with the building surveillance footage showing Claire arriving at nearly 2 a.m., painted a picture of a visit she had actively lied about. But it was the digital trail that turned the investigation. When detectives obtained a warrant for Claire's phone and laptop, they uncovered messages that had been deleted from her phone's primary messaging app, but were still backed up in cloud storage. Some were harmless. Others were deeply unsettling. One message sent just days before Hannah's death. "Read, I wish you D. Stop pretending like we not everything to each other. You act like I'm some random person, but I've been there for you through everything. Out. You don't get to shut me out now, after everything." Another. Saved as a draft and never sent. Simply said, "If I can't be in your life, maybe no one should." That sentence changed everything. In her interview with detectives, Claire denied ever feeling jealous, denied being upset about Hannah's growing independence, and denied harboring any resentment toward her. But when confronted with the recovered messages and the fingerprint evidence, her tone shifted. She claimed she had stopped by that night because she was worried about Hannah, because she felt something was wrong. She insisted she left before anything happened. But the timeline didn't hold. Neighbors reported hearing what sounded like an argument just before 3 a.m. A woman's voice raised, followed by something crashing. No one called the police at the time, assuming it was just a late-night dispute. But now, those small details began falling into place. The final piece came when investigators reviewed location data pulled from Claire's fitness tracking app. It showed her heart rate spiking between 2:58 and 3:12 a.m., while her phone remained stationary inside Hannah's building. The spike was sharp, sudden, and lasted for 14 minutes. Then, the heart rate dropped. The phone began moving again, leaving the building at 3:23 a.m. It was the exact window in which the attack likely occurred. When detectives brought Claire Dawson in for formal questioning a third time, the tone was markedly different from the previous interviews. There were no soft introductions or gentle openings. This time, they laid out the evidence clearly, precisely, piece by piece, the fingerprint on the glass, the video footage, placing her at the scene, the recovered messages that directly contradicted her prior statements, and finally, the fitness tracker data that marked her exact movements and elevated heart rate during the precise window of time Hannah was believed to have been attacked. Claire sat in the small, dimly lit interview room, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her expression flat but tense, her eyes no longer filled with tears but with calculation, as if weighing what the detectives knew against what they couldn't yet prove. They asked her again about that night. Why she had lied about not going to the condo. Why she stayed in the parking lot for nearly an hour. Why her phone's location history showed no movement while her heart rate spiked violently. Claire offered no explanation. She simply said, "I didn't hurt her." But the tone lacked conviction, as though she had rehearsed the words without fully believing them anymore. When the detectives pressed further, reading her own unsent message aloud, "If I can't be in your life, maybe no one should." Claire looked down, jaw clenched, but still said nothing. It was enough for the arrest warrant to be issued by the end of the day. News of the arrest spread quickly through the community. Westfield, a town not used to violent crime, was suddenly grappling with the reality that a woman many had seen smiling in photos with Hannah, celebrating birthdays and holidays, was now being charged with her murder. The emotional whiplash was devastating, especially for Hannah's family, who had welcomed Claire into their lives for years. Hannah's younger sister, Emily, told reporters, "It's hard to believe that someone who sat at our table, who we trusted, could be the one who took her from us. But now, looking back, there were things we ignored, things we brushed off because we never wanted to think someone close to her could be capable of this." As prosecutors began building their case, more details emerged. It turned out Claire had become increasingly isolated in the months leading up to Hannah's death. Her social media accounts were full of photos with Hannah, captions that often hinted at a closeness that wasn't entirely mutual. Friends of Hannah reported that she had recently started creating distance, saying she felt smothered by Claire's constant need for validation and attention. One close friend recalled Hannah saying, I feel like I'm always trying to manage her emotions, like I have to shrink myself just to make sure she doesn't fall apart. But even then, she never imagined things would turn violent. The trial date was set 6 months later, and the courtroom filled to capacity on the first day. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but reporters described the atmosphere as heavy, emotionally charged, with moments of intense silence broken only by the sound of sobs when graphic evidence or painful messages were introduced. The prosecution laid out their timeline with methodical precision, presenting the digital journal entries as Hannah's own voice from beyond the grave. Her writing showed a growing discomfort, slow realization that what she thought was friendship had twisted into something obsessive and dangerous. When Claire took the stand in her own defense, her demeanor was cold, calculated, her words measured, and emotionally distant. She denied everything. She claimed the messages were misinterpreted, that her presence at the apartment was out of concern, not confrontation. She insisted that Hannah had invited her over that night, and that they had argued, yes, but that she left her alive and well. But the evidence stacked too high around her surveillance footage, text messages, GPS data, and the final damning entry in Hannah's journal, which read, "She said I'm all she has left. I don't know how to help her anymore. Oh, and now I'm starting to think maybe I need help getting away." That entry was read aloud in court. And in that moment, it was no longer just about forensic science or digital trails. It was about heartbreak, about a woman who had seen the danger too late, about the terrible price she paid for trusting someone too much for too long. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecution stood to deliver closing arguments, the weight of the case pressing heavily on every person in attendance. After weeks of evidence, testimony, and emotional unraveling, the final moments of the trial were here, and the air inside that room seemed to vibrate with the gravity of what had unfolded. The lead prosecutor spoke clearly, not theatrically, but with the calm authority of someone who had spent every hour preparing to deliver justice. Not only for a victim, but for the people who had lived in the wake of her death. He walked the jury through the sequence again, not just the physical evidence, not just the text messages, not just the security footage or the fingerprint on the glass, but the psychological manipulation, possessive behaviors, and the diary entries that made one thing devastatingly clear. Hannah Carter had seen this coming. She had sensed the danger, recorded her fear, and yet even then, had not truly believed that someone she loved could ever be capable of such a final, brutal betrayal. He paused for a moment and then said quietly, "This wasn't an act of passion. It was premeditated proximity." Claire Dawson didn't lose control. She cultivated it. She created an emotional cage around Hannah, and when she realized she couldn't keep her inside it anymore, she made a decision that no one with real love would ever make. She chose to silence her forever. The room stayed still. No shifting, no coughing, no movement at all. Just that truth hanging there. When the defense responded, their approach was one of deflection. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the interpretation of the text messages was speculative, and that the emotional tone of the journal entries didn't equate to proof. They claimed Claire had been emotionally unstable, yes, but that she wasn't violent, that she had loved Hannah in her own way. But it was a weak closing, a contrast that only deepened the clarity of the state's case. And when Claire was escorted out of the courtroom that day, her eyes didn't meet anyone's, not the jury, not her family, and certainly not Hannah's. Deliberations lasted just over a day. There was tension, of course, the pressure of deciding someone's fate. But in the end, the weight of the truth documented not only in data and physical evidence, but in Hannah's own words, was too much to deny. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on all charges: first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and unlawful entry. Claire sat motionless as the verdict was read, blinking but showing no other emotion. Her face remained a mask of quiet detachment, as though the gravity of the moment failed to reach her. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the days that followed, tributes poured in for Hannah. Former co-workers shared stories of her professionalism and kindness. Friends remembered her as a constant light in their lives. Her sister Emily, who had sat through every day of the trial, announced the creation of the Hannah Carter Foundation. It's focused on helping individuals identify The warning signs of emotionally manipulative relationships that too often go unnoticed because they do and look like the threats we retaught to fear. And perhaps that is the most haunting part of this story, not that a woman died at the hands of someone close, but that she saw it coming. Documented the slow shift from loyalty to control, and still never imagined it would end the way it did. We're taught to fear the unknown, to watch for danger in strangers, to lock our doors against what's outside. But sometimes, the real danger doesn't knock. It's already inside, wearing the face of someone we trust, someone we love. Someone who smiles while slowly backing us into a place we no longer recognize. In the quiet that followed the verdict, as the courtroom emptied and reporters moved on to the next headline, those closest to Hannah Carter were left with a silence no sentence could ever truly fill. The loss was permanent, the betrayal irreversible. What was taken from them wasn't just a daughter, a sister, a friend. It was a future filled with conversations, shared holidays, late-night phone calls, and all the ordinary moments that suddenly meant everything once they were gone. But through the grief, Hannah's story became something more than just a cautionary tale. It became a reminder of how easily love can be mistaken for loyalty, how friendship can become control, how emotional manipulation can hide behind even the kindest smiles. Her words left behind in journal entries she never thought anyone would read became the voice that guided investigators to the truth, and in doing so, helped protect others from the same fate. Thank you for watching this full episode. If Hannah's story moved you or made you reflect on the people in your life, please take a moment to like the video, leave a comment below, and share it with others. Your engagement helps make sure these stories are not forgotten. And if you want to follow more real-life cases like this, stories that reveal the unexpected truths hidden behind familiar faces, make sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you never miss what is next. Because sometimes, the most dangerous people aren't strangers at all. They're the ones who are always just a little too close.